Welcome back to Crypto Clarified. This is the podcast series where we come together to discuss the most captivating headlines and trends from the crypto space. My name is Benjamin Dean, and I'm a director in WisdomTree's digital assets team. Today, I've got the pleasure of being joined by Alex Leishman, who's the CEO, CTO, and co-founder of River Financial. We're going to have a great discussion today. It's going to be very Bitcoin-centric, and as everyone knows, nobody loves discussing Bitcoin more than me. Before we start, we have social media shout-outs. If you're in the United States, go and check out wisdomtreeprime.com. You can find it in all the app stores. Go check it out. You won't be disappointed. In podcast land, hit subscribe. Make your life easier. It'll just drop straight into your phone or your device. If you subscribe, you can tune into us every time we do one of these episodes. Share it with your friends as well. Sharing is caring. You know that. And hey, we all want to be good friends to one another. So make everyone's life easier. As always, you can find me at Benjamin Dean on the Bird app. In today's episode with Alex, we're going to kind of run through the usual. He's got a very interesting background on how he got into the space and started working on River. We're going to talk a lot about Bitcoin and Bitcoin Lightning specifically. River provides services to institutional investors and financial service providers around Bitcoin. So we're going to talk about some of the obstacles that folks face and why you've got to think about topics like custody and security. Mundane, no. Extremely important, yes. So we're going to talk about that. Towards the end, we're going to stop. We're going to think about the future because, as you know, if there's one thing we love more than clarifying crypto on the show, it's thinking about the future. Before we start, though, shout out to James and Sam in compliance. I need to state the following. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of WisdomTree and River Financial and are subject to change. Anything we present in this podcast is not intended to be relied upon as a forecast, research, nor as investment or tax advice. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are not a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy and sell any securities. Reliance upon them is the sole discretion of the listener. Please remember, past performance is no indication of future results. Now we're on to the fun stuff. Alex, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Been looking forward to this episode. We got the chance to meet each other a few months ago when we were down in Orlando at the MicroStrategy conference, where they had a whole day dedicated to Bitcoin and a whole day dedicated to Lightning. So it's great to see you again. It's my pleasure to have you here. And thank you for taking the time to help us clarify some crypto with folks. To kick off these episodes, usually I invite guests just to kind of explain a little bit about their background, how they got into the space and what they're doing now. So I leave it to you to tell us a story.
My Bitcoin journey spans over a decade now. I started going down the economics rabbit hole as an undergraduate in college. I was an aerospace engineering student, but it was exploring other fields and other ideas. The first book I think I read was Thomas Sowell's Basic Economics, and that really sent me down this learning journey that led to me discovering other economists like Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, and I distinctly remember reading a paper by Friedrich Hayek called The Denationalization of Money, in which he proposed this concept of countries using money that the governments don't control themselves. This idea of competing currencies, of private money. That concept was fascinating to me. I had never really thought about that before. I had never really questioned central banking. And this sent me down a very interesting rabbit hole of starting to think, well, what should it look like? I actually agree, like, this idea of a central bank and some guy walks out once a quarter and says what the price of money is going to be and then walks back inside and the whole world sort of like organizes around this isn't the right way to do things. Well, what is the right way to do things? Is it the old gold standard? Is it commodity-backed competing currencies that some people proposed? And so I went through this whole exploration and came to this idea of wanting to create my own currency that was commodity-backed money that the government couldn't control. I quickly realized that there was a lot more laws and rules, and I was young, and it was a pretty intractable sort of thing for me to be working on. So I sort of shelved that idea, and then quickly afterwards came across Bitcoin. And once I understood it, and this was in 2013, once I understood it, and to understand it, I actually took a class on Coursera while I was working. I had just graduated on web engineering. And in that, Balaji Srinivasan was teaching that class on Coursera. And in that, we had to use the Coinbase API to create a Bitcoin donation page. And I started piecing it all together. I read the white paper and it started all to click. I was like, oh my gosh, like this is the answer. This is going to fulfill the prophecy. It was almost like weirdly religious once I understood it. And I still remember where I was sitting. And it and ever since then, I was just like, I have to work on this. And so I shortly thereafter quit my job in management consulting and moved to San Francisco with the dream of being a Bitcoin engineer. And so I moved there, did a programming boot camp, and got a job at a Bitcoin startup in 2014, and have been working in the industry mostly ever since. Since then, I've done a number of things. I ended up going back to grad school. I studied computer science at Stanford. I helped TA the first Bitcoin class there in 2015. I most recently, before uh, working at River, was at Polychain Capital on the investment team, but also helping build some infrastructure there as an engineer. And started River 4.5 years ago with the idea of what if, you know, basically trying to build the Bitcoin and bank in quotes, because we're not a we're not a bank, but the Bitcoin bank of the world. What would that look like? Reimagining a fully vertically integrated financial services company with where the base layer money is completely different and has completely different properties than US dollars. What does that look like? And that's the general thesis behind River.
Okay. It's an interesting story. I mean, I also remember reading Hayek years and years ago, and the theories around price signals as kind of information, a mechanism by which information kind of travels throughout an economy. And also, I mean, the idea that money can be information in a way is somewhat related. So I can totally see where you're coming from there. If you've got a background in computer science, right, then you can go and read the code and see it does what it says on the tin, is what they say in the United Kingdom. So I completely see that. Now, what's interesting with River, there's many interesting things, but it's Bitcoin only. And so what is it that kind of led you to that? I know we've always got to specialize, right? There's a million different things you could do. But if Bitcoin only, is there something specific around the kind of bank of Bitcoin that means you've got to remain laser focused on one specific thing?
Yes. So the reason we're Bitcoin only isn't ideological; it's economic. I truly believe that what so there's this broader cryptocurrency landscape, right? I deeply believe that the only cryptocurrency that's actually on a trajectory to become global money is Bitcoin. These other assets have all sorts of properties. They're being traded, people are building all sorts of things over there, but I do not believe they are on a trajectory to become global money. And that's the distinction. And so um, I think it's a fundamentally sort of flawed approach to treat all of these cryptocurrencies as just intercompatible assets that just trade, and every app you build should just be for all of these assets. I don't think that actually makes sense. Um, and so the idea behind River is like Bitcoin and Bitcoin alone is on a trajectory to become the gold of the internet, the internet native money. And there's going to be a new generation of financial services built natively around that. And it doesn't mean that River customers won't own these other assets, but they'll own them in other places. You have your bank account at Bank of America, but you might have a Fidelity account for trading your stocks, right? Um, your bank account and where you do financial speculation are not often the same thing. And or where you save your money and where you perform your payments is a different place than where you financially speculate. And so the vision behind River is building the best in class products that help individuals and businesses and institutions utilize Bitcoin as a store of value and a medium of exchange. And so we laser focus on Bitcoin because Bitcoin has unique properties with the products that we build here, such as the Lightning Network, as you alluded to earlier. And by not worrying about whether we're dealing in securities or whether we're, like kind of opening ourselves up to this whole other landscape of complexity and challenges with the broader cryptocurrency ecosystem, it gives us the resources to focus on doing this really, really well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I appreciate that you there kind of explaining some of the differences there where I've noticed, I mean, I get to speak to a lot of institutional investors in the course of my day job. And a lot of people collapse down everything into crypto when it's all the same and it's all crypto. And I'll often have to explain to them, there's more than Bitcoin, and then they go, really? And we go into the whole thing. Yes, there's Ethereum. Yes, there are tokens issued on Ethereum, so on and so forth. Um, just kind of demarcating that is useful, I think, A, for the listeners, and then B, also, it does help kind of make sense about what you're doing. You mentioned two terms there: Bitcoin as a store of value and Bitcoin as a payment means. Uh, I imagine they are very different things. So how about we run the listeners through a little bit there, like when you've got folks who come in and they see Bitcoin as a store of value, what are kind of the obstacles that they run into? Well, who are they? And then when they look at it, it's seeing it as a store of value. What obstacles they have? What do they need?
Yeah, great question. And I think maybe just to answer that more clearly, I should be explicit about what we actually offer
Yeah,
as a product or a service. So we have three verticals. We offer Bitcoin brokerage, custody, and wallet services to individuals. So basically, that's an app, make it really easy to buy and move Bitcoin around. For businesses, it's something similar. And then we have a Lightning Network sort of Bitcoin payments infrastructure business. And this helps other businesses who are building apps connect to this and move and help their users transact in Bitcoin much more seamlessly and easily. So when people are coming in to buy Bitcoin, whether it's a wealthy individual or an institution, there's that there's a few different types of people. Some, they know exactly what they want. They know Bitcoin. They're just like, here's my money. I want some Bitcoin. Let's make the trade. For others, there's some really common questions and concerns that they're trying to get over before they pull the trigger. A big one is security, um,
yeah,
and just like they don't know what they don't know, but they're smart, right? And so like, and so that they're trying to figure out what they should be worried about. So and often the question I get from some of the sharp people I talk to is what should I be worried about? Tell me, right? Tell me what I should worry about. That's really what they want to know, because it's this whole new world of risks that they've never had to learn about before, like key management. Like what? Like,
yeah,
um, there's this interesting thing with Bitcoin where unlike all the other assets they've ever owned, land, equity in a company, um, it could just disappear. Like your land can't disappear. Your equity in the company can't just like disappear. It's all enforced by this rule of law that we very intuitively understand. Bitcoin is just math. Like, how do I reason about this thing? And so, getting over that, talking about security, talking about how things can go wrong and how we protect against that. Another big one is, well, what happens if I die? Um, that's a surprisingly common question. What happens if I die? Like, how do my kids get this? Should I be, moving this Bitcoin into my own custody? Should I leave it with you? How does that work? How do I think through that decision process? Um, those are the types of questions we get.
yeah. That makes sense. I don't know if I mentioned to you when we saw each other last, or even in our discussions since then. My background's in cybersecurity, and it's very similar discussions I was having 10 years ago, explaining how to protect a network and what to look out for, and then transposing those ideas onto this space. You mentioned key management, and that comes up, almost immediately. Exactly the same issue there. How do I protect? It's encryption keys in cybersecurity. Here, it's the private keys, which do encrypt, of course, but that's one piece there in the custody arrangements. Um, there is that question then around custody: who is holding the keys and in what way. So I imagine you have to break that down, as we do as well, in our interactions with investors. And then, yeah, that last one. Funny enough, I mean, Bitcoin's been around for 15 years now. What happens if, and you have to recover the keys? It's all there. I see the exact same thing, and it's hard, right? Like, same way I used to try and explain to, they'd be worried, how can I get hacked and who's going to get me? I don't understand cybersecurity. Can you help me? It's a similar one here, right? Um, very,
Yeah,
very clear.
exactly. Well, and just to add one interesting thing, Bitcoin is this asset that in the traditional financial space, we have all these like regulatory regimes and checkboxes to make you feel comfortable. Do you have this audit? Are you a qualified custodian, et cetera, et cetera? And that regime was built for the traditional world of assets and
Yeah,
was pretty good at keeping those things safe. But those laws and those rules were not designed for keeping Bitcoin safe. And so you can have all the legal checkboxes in the world. the law, like Bitcoin doesn't care about what the law says, right? If like the custodian loses your key, it's gone. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter what the rules are. Like there's just this like fundamental sort of like more raw reality of things that you're forced to think about with Bitcoin.
Yeah, true. The good news is they're very tractical problems. It's essentially risk and operational kind of management.
Mhm.
There are playbooks, as you say, very well battle tested playbooks, not just from traditional finance, but from also technical fields. It's really just a matter of transposing those ideas and adjusting them given the stakes, right? But let's move on to then the kind of second part. So we've just, for the listener's sake, we've just covered Bitcoin as a store of value. And there's a variety of products out there and services, people who see it as a store of value and want to kind of maintain their control and security of their assets. The second piece, though, is around payments. And for this one, I'm going to ask you to kind of run the listeners through kind of step by step, because for years, a common claim is that Bitcoin can't do what the Satoshi white paper said, and that's as an electronic payments means. It's too slow, it's too expensive, so on and so forth. But something has changed in the last few years. We can call it Bitcoin Lightning. Can you run kind of just the listeners through just like from the ground up, really? What is it? And then maybe how it works. And let's see where we get to, because we could do a whole episode on Lightning alone, but we've got to kind of make it as succinct as we can.
Absolutely, and I think for the listener, what I will say is the how it the what it is easy to intuit and reason about. The how it works is a very deep rabbit hole,
Yeah.
and you're not gonna understand that all right away. But it's a journey that's very fascinating if you want to go down that, and I'll try and give you a direction. Um, so how do you reason about Bitcoin and this new Lightning thing? So Bitcoin, the right way to think about it is it's this global decentralized ledger. We call this the blockchain. Um, this ledger, it has all of the Bitcoin transactions that have ever happened, and it is replicated on anyone's computer who's running the Bitcoin node software. So, as you can imagine, well, if anyone needs to be able to run this Bitcoin node, which we want to be the case so that it stays decentralized, the amount of transactions happening in the Bitcoin network, the number of transactions can't be that high because not everyone's running some beefy server to handle all the transactions in the world. So there's a very strict limit on the amount of transactions and the transaction rate on the Bitcoin network. And so this is a constraint that helps Bitcoin stay decentralized. So therefore, the Bitcoin network can only support about 7 transactions per second. Um, And that's a fundamental constraint. If Bitcoin is going to serve as the money of the world, the money of the internet, like I previously suggested, how can this possibly scale? Well, there's a number of ways it can scale. One is through centralized means, right? For example, like Coinbase. Everyone with a Coinbase account can send Bitcoin to each other, but it doesn't touch the blockchain. It's just in their central database. That's one way to scale, or Cash App, or River, or somewhere else. But that's not that great because that forces these centralized scaling solutions. So how can we keep the same open, decentralized, permissionless uh, uh, traits of the Bitcoin blockchain, but scale that? And that's where the Lightning Network comes in. And the analogy to think about here is the Bitcoin blockchain is like Fedwire. Sending a Bitcoin transaction, the Bitcoin blockchain is like sending a wire that goes through the Federal Reserve. It's like settling through the Fed. It's like it's like on the ledger. It's like going through the heart of things. Um, but for a $20 payment, you're probably not going to send a wire, right? You'll probably pay with a credit card. And so the Lightning Network is like the Visa of Bitcoin. It's this layer above that where all these transactions are bouncing around, and the parties that are part of that network, when they choose to, can settle out to the main Bitcoin blockchain. But until they do that, there's just all these IOUs bouncing around using cryptography to enforce the guarantees of the IOUs. And that's the high level concept behind the Lightning Network. Now, the how exactly does all of that work? Well, it utilizes some of the programmability that Bitcoin transactions have. It utilizes some clever cryptography and math, and creates this network of promises that allow anyone connected to this network to pay each other.
So the listeners are now familiar with all the kind of engineering trade-offs that are involved when building and maintaining these networks. And I appreciate you pointing that out. Indeed, not everyone can run a full Bitcoin node if the blocks that are appended are so large in aggregate that it means it's infeasible below a certain budget to run the network. So there's that piece. The other piece that I hope is coming through as well is, and you said it, is that it's a set of layers. And a lot of people don't realize that. Like, they use the internet all the time, and the internet is layered. You've got kind of the infrastructure level at the bottom, fiber optic cables. You've got TCP/IP protocol. You've got applications, browsers that run on top of that. Anyway, people should be intuitively familiar with the way the internet works in that sense. Facebook is not the internet. It's a platform that sits on top of this technology stack. In past episodes, we've talked about how the Ethereum network is layered. And here, the important part to get through is, as you said, the Bitcoin network, with its high level of decentralization and security because of the hash rate, as a base layer, how can you build software on top of it that leverages the security of the network while granting extra functionality that, when cleverly written, new software can deliver? So, as you said, there we go. We have the Lightning Network, the kind of Visa of Bitcoin, fast, cheap transactions that essentially, when people open these, I'm going to introduce a new term here, channels, you're opening the channel by making an entry on the base Bitcoin layer. And then when you close the channel and reconcile everybody's kind of obligations, then you make another transaction. So instead of having 1,000 transactions, let's say arbitrarily 1,000, it could be 1,000,000, having to inscribe them all on the base layer. You have one to open, one to close, and then everything else happens off chain in a decentralized way. What then are some of the challenges you see as folks who provide a Bitcoin Lightning service? Or what are people coming to you then and saying, like, I want to integrate Lightning, but I don't know how to do it? What are the problems that they run into, and how do you folks help sort them out?
So our payments infrastructure product, it's an API, kind of like Stripe. So the way to think about it is, like, we're kind of like for Lightning what Stripe was for credit cards. Developers come to us; they don't really have to understand how the Lightning network works. We do that. That's what our focus. We run all this infrastructure that makes these payments just work, and we give developers an interface that is very intuitive to them, that they understand, so that they can easily integrate this payment rail into their app without having to learn all the ins and outs of how does this work, running all the infrastructure themselves. And so we try to abstract away all of that complexity, and that's the value we're offering. And the benefit of using this is now any app that has Bitcoin balances for users can plug into this network and make that Bitcoin way easier to move around quickly. And so, depending on the app you're building, it can provide a lot of value. If you're another crypto exchange somewhere and you plug into our infrastructure, now when people deposit Bitcoin to your exchange, instead of waiting 20 or 30 minutes for that Bitcoin to confirm on the Bitcoin blockchain, they can start trading right away. That's a revenue bump. That prevents user drop off. If you're building like a wallet app, all of a sudden, and you have brokerage services, all of a sudden maybe you're in Canada, and you can partner with an exchange in India, and you could do a Canadian dollar to Bitcoin conversion, send immediately over to the India exchange. They can immediately convert that to rupees, and you can even abstract that away from your users, so it looks like someone in India just sent Canadian dollars to somebody in India. Somebody in Canada just sent Canadian dollars to somebody in India, for a remittance payment, and it just works. It's instant. And so these are the types of people coming to us, and this is the type of value it actually provides to people building apps.
Yeah, that last point there is an important one. I often spend a lot of time trying to explain that to people, because a common kind of pushback will be, nobody wants to hold Bitcoins. They're too volatile in price. And so it just doesn't work as a payment mechanism. But as you say, if you abstract away from the underlying technology, essentially you can have people turning, as you said, Canadian dollars into Bitcoin, having it shot across the world in inverted commas, because of course it's not going across the world. It's on a global network. But then it's converted on the other end within seconds, And in that way, like people have not, they don't even have to realize that they've been using a Bitcoin network, do they? All they care about is that money moves certainly much faster than international wire services and Swift. So you get the utility from it. And it's, it's a little bit like nobody ever argues with me about their encrypted messaging app and telling me that they don't like that it uses a certain like encryption implementation. All they care about is the message goes from point A to B in a way that's secure. Here, it's like all I care is that the money in inverted commas goes from point A to point B in a fast way that's superior to kind of the traditional legacy rails. Go a little bit deeper though on like who these people are. And you've already said before you think Bitcoin's going to be kind of the internet money for the internet or global money. Um, who are the folks who are coming and asking about this at the moment? Are they doing cross-border payments? Are they more domestic? You've mentioned exchanges. There may be other folks. Who are they?
It's all sorts of companies. We have public companies that we serve. We have small regional companies globally. A big segment that I'm very excited about is all of the um, crypto exchanges around the world. There's a lot of regional players, and over the last call it 5 to 8 years, they've built really good regional um, Bitcoin to fiat gateways, right? And they have strong banking relationships in their country. They understand the market, they understand the user base, and they have just a seamless way to move between a local fiat currency and Bitcoin. And what we're seeing is these companies are going, well, if we connect to Lightning, all of a sudden value can transfer just instantly between us and any other regional player. So what I'm seeing is Bitcoin is becoming this with Lightning, because it's removed the time delays for value transfer. We've gone from like a 30-minute wait time to transfer value to instant. And so now all these players are realizing, hold on, like there's now this instant open value transfer network I can connect to. That allows me to serve as potentially the best way to send value internationally in my country or receive value internationally, because I'm handling that sort of fiat interface with the residents, and on the back end, I can move their value via Bitcoin anywhere in the world 24/7, and my counterparty on the receiving end is another regional player that can then convert that back to the fiat currency of the other party. And that's a very and so what we're seeing is this open network for value transfer really starting to um, become so good that it's truly unlocking value for people who even don't care about Bitcoin.
I like there's two ideas in there that I like. One of them is this idea of the open global network. Anyone can plug into it. So it's now a relatively simple integration that you can make because of there's kind of service providers out there like you folks. But if you can plug into a global network like that, anyone can plug into if they want. I mean, that's far more powerful than MasterCard or Visa. If you go to the People's Republic of China, you can't really use your Visa card, or you'll have difficulties finding it. And I use that as an example. There's plenty of parts of the world where you might have a MasterCard and you can't use it. You might have a Visa card or a WorldPay card or whatever. Because they're not entirely regional, but they don't have a global reach by definition. So there's that piece there. Second piece is the one that you mentioned around the local service providers. There is almost like a last mile problem in some cases. Like people will want to move their money out or off a distributed network like Bitcoin and then go and spend it in their local currency. And so if you've got that kind of local on-off ramp facilitated partly by Bitcoin Lightning, you start to end up with a situation like I see with Strike. A lot of people are surprised when I'll tell them that Strike will take US dollars, beam them to a mobile money provider in Nigeria, who then converts it into money on the back end almost instantaneously. And suddenly, like the light bulb sometimes goes off, where they realize that it's a infrastructure for transporting value, actually. And that's extremely interesting because it wasn't around a few years ago, and I'm only just starting to see a few people kind of crack that nut. And it is a very powerful value proposition. Uh, Look, we're coming up on time relatively soon. So usually to finish these episodes up, like especially when we have guests on, we think a little bit about the future. Like, what have you got your eye on? What are you interested in or excited in? It's a very open question. You don't even, well, you're probably going to say something about Bitcoin, but don't feel penned in there at all. Just help the listeners kind of orient their own gaze. Where should they be looking, in your opinion, and what are you looking forward to or excited about?
So on the Bitcoin side, I'm very excited about the next 5 to 10 years. I think Bitcoin continues to slowly and then quickly transform beyond its current role as a store of value or investment tool into this global currency. It's not going to happen overnight, but the momentum is there, and it's something to pay attention to. And the thing I'd like people to take away is, it's not just saying, oh, now you can move money over the internet. That's like saying, like, the internet allowed you to just send information, like, oh, now you can send a message easier to somebody. No, that reducing that friction and making that programmatic has unlocked like trillions of dollars of value for the world and has changed our civilization, changed our societies, changed our cultures in ways we could have never expected. Um, Bitcoin is like that for money. So don't just think of this one dimensionally. Like, there's going to be second and third order effects that we can't even predict today. Spend time thinking about that and trying to see what those might be. As for other things, I think lots of things are interesting. Um, uh, One of the things from a tech perspective, I think, is a cool trend that a lot of people aren't paying attention to that I think is kind of cool is a lot of innovation in hardware. I think there's a lot of open source work being done to make chips, chip instruction sets, with this thing called RISC-V, open and without having to pay royalties to folks like ARM and others or Intel. Just playing the bug in people's ears. I think it's super cool. Check out RISC-V. It's super nerdy, but it's just something I feel like people aren't super in the loop on. So I'll just show that one.
That's good. Excellent. We love nerding out on the show almost as much as we love clarifying crypto, which I guess involves nerding out as well. The common thread in those two things there is kind of disintermediation, where in the kind of the Bitcoin case, you've got a whole lot of gatekeepers and intermediaries who get cut out essentially with a network that is a truly global and international. Well, global and international is the same thing. It's truly digital and it's truly global to match the digital and world economy and globalized economy that we live in now. And then, open source intellectual property. As you say, chip manufacturers, I guess their patents then aren't nearly as valuable if that kind of knowledge disseminates more freely. But hey, we could go on all day, I'm sure. But unfortunately, we have to close things up. Alex, where can people find you and River on the interwebs?
Well, it's easy to find River. We're at river.com, and we're at River on Twitter. And then on Twitter, I'm also my last name, at Leishman. So feel free to check us out there.
Excellent. Great. Well, thanks again for joining me. With that, we're out of time. I hope everyone's found today's podcast useful and informative. If you're in the US, wisdomtreeprime.com. You can go to the website, or you can check it out on the Apple and Android app stores. You can always find me at Benjamin Dean on the Bird app. Hit me up if you want, and you want me to cover anything in future episodes. With that, it's the end of the show, but we will be back very soon. Got a great lineup of guests over the next couple of months, so stay tuned. And with that, thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great day.